Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. In today's episode, we are taking a look at how the Isu could have inspired mythology. In this episode, I won't be trying to make all mythologies discussed fit into the Assassin's Creed universe. I have done a similar episode called Is Fantasy Canon, where I do look at this more in detail, but that is not what this episode is about. And the reason for that is I do believe some tales told over time may have been changed to make them sound more exciting. A good idea would be King Arthur and Excalibur. A Sword of Eden could have been Excalibur, giving the real King Arthur some strong abilities, but fighting dragons and the other tales from King Arthur's legend may have just been fiction added to make the stories sound more heroic. So before we get started, I want to thank some wonderful people. I want to thank the Nerdy Archer, who runs the Rookery Archives podcast, and a random trickster from the Assassin's Creed Sisterhood Discord server. They both have given me some help on ideas on what to talk about, and I want to give them a massive shout out. But I want to give a great big shout out to Amaya, who originally suggested this topic. Now, I want to make an apology if I don't discuss everything we've talked about. I apologize, but there was a lot to go over. So let's begin. So we know a lot from Odyssey about how the Isu can influence mythology. We see the pieces of Eden were fused with humans in a scientific experiment to make the gods, such as Medusa and the Minotaur and Sphinx. Now, this was the first forte in mythology becoming real. But it wasn't real. Essentially, this is just fake because it's a scientific experiment. It's not what we see in tales. But it does open the floodgates to what's more possible. Now, I'm not going to touch too much on Greek mythology because I think Odyssey did that well enough by showing how the creatures we fought from Medusa and the Minotaur and the Sphinx wasn't real mythology. They're not real mythological creatures. This isn't fantasy coming alive. This was a scientific experiment. I can't remember the purpose, but a scientific experiment that was just inhumane in a lot of ways. But the one I wanted to touch upon was humans. And by humans, I mean how humans were created. Now, we know humans were created from the Isu, and I don't think we've ever been told who created us. But there is Greek mythology that we were created from Prometheus. And Prometheus is the one who, I believe, created humans first. I'm just looking at my notes now. So Amaya did ask, do you think Prometheus had a hand in creating the first human beings as he did in Greek legends? And, well, we can't say no, and we can't say yes, because we know that humans, also known as Homo sapiens or Homo neanderthalensis, was artificially created by the Isu at some point between 1923 and 2296 Isu era, which is about 75,383 to 75,010 BCE as docile servants. But there's no name. So it is possible that during humans' forte in the world after the total catastrophe and a lot of the artifacts left around, that a Greek or somebody else found a vault that depicted how humans were created, and maybe the Isu was called Prometheus, because we do know that Juno and Minerva and Zeus that we hear about in as far back as the second game are named after Greek deities, but they were also Isu. So it seems that the Isu names were then given to gods. It doesn't mean that the Isu are gods, it just means that humans may have stumbled upon these Isu through temples, through pieces of Eden, and assume them to be gods. I do believe Abstergo classify Isu as Homo Divineus, something along that lines, I can't really remember. So it is possible that somebody found Prometheus's data logs on how he created humans, and he's just an ordinary Isu trying to find a way to make servants. And what if that legend spread and the Greeks built this whole tale on Prometheus making humans and giving them fire and everything? And it doesn't mean that it can actually happen. It maybe means that this is the first time that Isu influenced human life. But the biggest take I want to look at has to be Norse and English myths and legends. And this isn't just because Valhalla's around the corner, because this is a big part, yes. But it's because we're visiting a world, well, a country, that is so steeped in myths and legends, and Norse has a fair share of deep mythological and legends that make up the culture, that it's easy to ignore that maybe Isu influenced this. And one of the big influences I've talked about a lot, and I don't know the answers because I don't know anything about Valhalla till it comes out, is Stonehenge. Now there's lots of theories going around that Stonehenge is an Isu vault. You know, there's the maps from Syndicate and everything. But the significant part of Stonehenge, which is not looked at from an Assassin's Creed point of view, is the Old English legends of ley lines. Now, essentially, a ley line is a supernatural power source that crisscrosses all over the UK. I think there's about hundreds of them, but everywhere a ley line intersects, you get a stone circle. And lo and behold, Stonehenge sits on a ley line. Now, in the real world, this means nothing. It's just a supernatural power source underneath Stonehenge. What's the purpose? We don't know. But we know Stonehenge was used in many rituals for worship, and I still think today in the real world, not game world, people do witness the solstice at Stonehenge, so it still has a spiritual connection. And what if these ley lines that crisscross England are like power lines? Isu power lines are powering a vault. Or, as I speculate more, a cryostasis. These ley lines power a temple that is holding Isu in cryostasis. Just because Odyssey did talk about the Isu coming back. So what if this is like a nexus or a cryostasis place for Isu to return? The other legend I want to talk about from the English side that is probably not going to relate to Valhalla as much, but it could tell the tale of a piece of Eden or a gate of Eden, as I'm going to nickname it, and that's Halloween. Halloween in pagan myth is All Hallows Eve. It's essentially a time of the year when the spirit world and the human world's veil is weakest, so ghosts can come over. And we've not seen ghosts in Assassin's Creed unless you count the Headless Horseman Easter egg. But it is possible with Isu technology that a piece of Eden was found during this time of new culture, learning stuff, where something that's so strange to us humans now, if we're so used to basic bronze tools, looks godlike, could have been a gate on a time, on a loop, and every 31st of October, this device activated, and an Isu was able to come back from the Nexus, or able to communicate from the other side to the humans, give them messages, just how um, Juno and Minerva and Alethea have been able to communicate with Cassandra and Desmond in the past games. So maybe an artifact like this was found by pagans, and maybe they didn't understand what it was, but they were trying to foretell them a message, and this just seeped into legend that over time, every 31st of October, this is going to keep reoccurring, and it just bled into this whole thing where we start to believe this is a day where the dead will come back, essentially. And this doesn't mean that it's canon, as it explained, but it means that maybe this tale could have started from an Isu artifact that just spread like Chinese whispers. Some of the other stuff I want to talk about is some of my favourite stuff that I had a chat with a trickster in the a random trickster And he pointed out um, that in Norse mythology there is a lot of artifacts. Some of them are I see pointless. There might not be, but there's Draupnir, which is Odin's gold ring that can make 9 more copies of itself every ninth night by a drop of gold. I don't know what an Isu could have used this for, but it does have an Isu-ish connection. Um, we also have stuff like, well, Gleipnir, a thin unbreakable ribbon used to bind Fenris in Ragnarok, which I will get onto that in a minute. But that could all be like a chain. Maybe the Isu tied a prisoner up, Fenris. Maybe Fenris was a prisoner in the Isu time, and they binded him with this Gleipnir. If I pronounce the names wrong, please shoot me. I'm not very good at names, so please tell me off if I have done. I apologize. But again, maybe I don't know how, but maybe they stumbled into Norse mythology and they saw it as a big trinket, something that if they had it, it would be an unbreakable bond that no one could tie. They could use it to tie up kings and keep them ransom because no one can free them. I've really not studied much of Norse mythology, so I don't know what they would have known to use this for if it wasn't a Isu artifact. What purpose the assassins or templars could get out of it? God knows. Um, Another one I heard was the Sword of Fear, but I think the Sword of Fear could have just been another name for the Sword of Eden. They've cropped up. I think Joan of Arc had a Sword of Eden. I assume Excalibur was a Sword of Eden, and Unity had a Sword of Eden. So maybe the Sword of Fear was an upgraded version of the Sword of Eden. And Eddie Archer mentioned King Lear. Now, I haven't had much chance to look at King Lear, but I know that King Lear's daughters are part of part of Valhalla's mythology via hallucinogenic. Now, it is sad that it's part of a wild mushroom hallucinogenic because I could see King Lear being something kind of cool to do with Isu oriented. But the issue is, and I will be honest, if we rely too much on making stories connect to Isu, it will water them down. But this is why I strongly believe that maybe some of the tales and mythologies and legends aren't to do with Isu artifacts per se. Instead, this is just tales because um, of these artifacts. You know, what they do is, well, who knows? We don't actually know what these artifacts do, but there is a possibility that they've bled into the human world and we've just absorbed them into our life and our culture. Because we know from Ezio witnessing all this, he was, he just shrugged it off. But back in his culture, he learned this the Hidden Blade. He'd learned about this secret organization. He was accustomed to it. But if somebody randomly picked up an apple of Eden and was able to either make copies of himself or mind control somebody as its original purpose, this would look like the work of gods. This is nowhere saying that Isu are gods. This is just saying that the human mind will see things a bit differently. And I don't really know how this could all fit in Valhalla, but maybe we might learn more about how the Norse mythology and some pagan myths bled into, well, the whole myths and legends of Assassin's Creed itself. I have had a look through a lot of the pagan myths, and I can't rattle them all off because I could be here forever. But a lot of them do talk about harvest and seasons and stuff like that. And it got me thinking that maybe a lot of the pagan myths could have been to do with terraforming. And terraforming is essentially just the idea that a device can make a barren landscape fertile. You take it to Mars, you can make Mars fertile, unlike Earth, with grass, river, atmosphere, and everything. And this isn't magic. Terraforming is a science. Well, I don't know if it's possible now, but it is a science we've seen a lot in fantasy. And I really think that terraforming could be an explanation for a lot of reasons why pagans had rituals to do with harvest and stuff like that. And maybe somebody found a Isu device that was able to terraform crops, make harsh winters nothing but a distant memory. If we had a harsh winter, we could still eat in the spring because we could use a terraforming equipment. And maybe then over time they started to worship and hoping that this device would be used again to make these lands fertile. But as we know, maybe it never came, and they kept worshipping and worshipping and worshipping because that's how humans were back then. They took these deities and other stuff and went and tried the hardest to keep worshipping, hoping for these miracles. And now I want to swing back to um, what I'm going to call slightly crazy theory. And now if you listen to this show from the start, I love my theories. My new one that I am really excited to see if it becomes true is Ragnarok. I've become of the idea that Ragnarok is the end of the world, but not as we know it. We do know that Alethea says that time needs to correct itself because of Desmond's actions. And what if Ragnarok is a prophecy of that happening again? But what if Ragnarok, and this is where things are going to get a whole new level of slightly crazy. But what if Ragnarok was the original Isu human war? But the very tail end, and the events that happened didn't all happen at once, but happened over time. But a Viking yes, a Norse or a Viking stumbled upon a temple that depicted the end of the war like a tapestry in different sections. And what if each part of Ragnarok is an event of the Isu War, all leading up to the Toboga catastrophe that ended the world? And to make the story fit, they added descriptions of what happened, and that would finally lead into this whole thing where they'll tell the story and they'll tell about gods and everyone fighting together, and then the world ends. Because let's just quickly jump to what Amaya sent me. Midgard will be ravaged by three winters. Man will be driven into desperation and turn on each other. This is a possible act. Um, it is possible that over time the man could have become exhausted of war. We do know the Easter War lasted 10 years, so they could have turned on each other to try and end the war. So maybe a rebellion for peace versus a rebellion for control. The original ideas for assassins and templars, maybe? Skull and Haiti will swallow the sun and the moon whole. I think Skull and Haiti could be a representation of the Toga catastrophe. That when the solar flare hit, it caused massive worldwide damage, and it could have looked like the sun and the moon was gone because of just how everything was just wiped out. Loki's son Fenrir will break free from his chains, and Nilfgaard will appear with Fenrir's brother, Jormungand, the world serpent, rising the tides of the seas. I could see this as another implication of the Toga catastrophe. This is just all these events are breaking free, and the seas will rise from tsunamis. Maybe like causes we know about fault lines, so maybe the Toga catastrophe affected fault lines, causing earthquakes and tsunamis. And to give these a physical representation, they were created gods. And maybe this chain, this ribbon that we first talked about, could be a key to keeping it together. Maybe they saw this as a physical representation of the breaking point of the war that made them forget about the oncoming catastrophe because they're so distracted fighting that it just snapped metaphorically and the whole world just ended. It's not a physical representation, maybe it's just a metaphor for something that happened. The fire giant rise to battle, and so will the gods with slain warriors from Valhalla. Then there's a clash. Gods, giants, monsters, and humans fight to the death. The fight until the earth is no more, or so the tale goes. Again, I do believe that this is just everyone just fighting to the bitter end before the world ends. This is just a whole. I think the fire giants and the gods will represent the Isu themselves. Slain warriors from Valhalla and the dead. I think that could be something to do with either a Shroud of Eden or a Gate of Eden that I talked about. Because I think when an Isu dies, they go to the Grey or the Nexus. I'm sorry, but Isu knowledge is a bit off today. So what if a Gate of Eden that I talked about before on All Hallows Eve was what was used to resurrect some Isu warriors? And I told you this is just a slightly crazy theory, but all these tales were probably told in sections. They didn't all happen at once, but told in sections like a tapestry. But Vikings being prominent storytellers around great fires, maybe they put all these together and told of a tale of the world ending, Ragnarok, gods and humans at war, all nine realms, and maybe that's what's to come. So, sadly, this is all we have time for. It is a bit of a strange topic. I hope you enjoy this one. Next week's topic, I'll be going over the second favourite from our poll, Messiah, which, if you all remember, is the legendary home of Altea. It's where we spend most of our time defending in AC1, but we're going to learn more about it. If you would like to suggest any ideas, then please just hit me up. I'm on Twitter at Let's Talk, at AC Let's Talk. Come chat, just tag me if you want. I'm happy with that. You can send me a message on the Discord that's linked there, and I will respond as quick as possible. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you all next week.